It started like any ordinary day. The bell rang, and the chatter of students filled the air as we shuffled between classes. I was halfway through my math homework during study hall when the intercom crackled. "This is a lockdown. This is not a drill." The room fell silent. Our teacher, Mr. Carter, sprang into action, locking the door, switching off the lights, and motioning for us to huddle in the corner. We crouched together, our breaths shallow, the gravity of the announcement sinking in. "Phones off," Mr. Carter whispered. "Stay silent." I fumbled to mute mine, my hands trembling. I glanced at my friend Emily, her eyes wide with fear, and mouthed, "What's happening?" She shook her head. Then we heard it, the faint metallic sound of footsteps in the hall. Clang, clang. It wasn't the hurried pace of someone running. It was deliberate, slow. "Is that a cop?" someone whispered, their voice barely audible. Mr. Carter gave them a sharp look, pressing a finger to his lips. The footsteps paused right outside our door. My chest tightened as I watched the doorknob twist, slowly back and forth. Locked. Thank God. But then came a sound that sent chills through my body, a low, rasping whisper. "I know you're in there." My breath caught in my throat. Emily gripped my hand so tightly it hurt. Suddenly the footsteps resumed, moving away down the hall. The tension in the room eased just a fraction, but no one dared to speak. Minutes passed, then an hour. A notification buzzed softly in my pocket. I panicked, thinking I hadn't silenced my phone. I glanced at the screen. It was from Emily's phone. But Emily wasn't holding it. I read the message. "Help me." My blood turned cold. I looked at Emily, sitting right next to me, her face pale. She hadn't moved. Her phone was still in her backpack, zipped shut. Another message appeared. "I'm in the hallway." I clamped a hand over my mouth to stifle a gasp. I turned to Mr. Carter, trying to signal him without speaking, but his attention was focused on the door. The intercom crackled again, startling everyone. "All clear, the lockdown is over. Please return to your classes." Mr. Carter hesitated, his eyes scanning the room. Slowly he unlocked the door and peeked out. The hallway was empty. One by one we filed out, tense but grateful it was over. I stayed close to Emily as we walked toward the cafeteria, but something was wrong. The air felt heavy, the fluorescent lights flickering. As we rounded the corner, I stopped in my tracks. Standing at the end of the hallway was Emily. Not the Emily beside me, but another Emily. Identical, except her skin was ashen, and her eyes were hollow black voids. She raised a hand, pointing directly at me, and whispered, "You should have helped me." I turned to the Emily beside me, but she was gone. The hallway erupted in darkness, and the last thing I heard was the distant clang of footsteps. They say the school is empty after dark. I learned the hard way that it's not. Detention had never felt so long. I sat alone in the back of the room, watching the clock tick painfully towards 6 o'clock. Mr. Harris, the math teacher, sat at his desk, grading papers in silence. Every time I looked at him, he seemed completely engrossed in his work. I had forgotten my homework 3 times that week, and now I was paying for it. "This will teach you responsibility," he'd said before leaving me to my thoughts. When the clock finally struck 6, Mr. Harris gave me a curt nod and left. "Lock the door behind you," he said, his voice echoing in the empty hallway. I gathered my things, relieved that it was finally over. The school felt strange after hours, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath. My footsteps echoed as I walked, the sound unnervingly loud in the silence. As I approached the exit, I noticed room 104. The door was slightly ajar, and a faint light flickered from within. I stopped, frowning. No one was supposed to be here this late. The custodians always locked the classrooms by 5. "Hello?" I called, pushing the door open. The fluorescent lights buzzed weakly, casting a cold, flickering glow. The desks were arranged in perfect rows, and the chalkboard still had the day's lesson written in Mr. Harris's precise handwriting. At first I thought the room was empty, but then I saw it. At the very back, a student sat hunched over a desk, scribbling furiously in a notebook. "Hey," I said, stepping inside. "You're here late too?" The student froze. Slowly they lifted their head. My breath caught in my throat. Their face wasn't a face at all. It was blank. No eyes, no nose, no mouth. Just smooth, pale skin. I stumbled backward, my backpack slipping from my shoulder and hitting the floor with a loud thud. The sound seemed to startle the figure. They stood, their chair screeching loudly against the floor. Before I could process what was happening, I felt a presence behind me. A cold breath tickled the back of my neck. "Detention isn't over yet," a raspy voice whispered. I turned slowly, my heart pounding. Mr. Harris was standing there, but something was horribly wrong. His eyes were hollow pits of darkness, his mouth stretched unnaturally wide into a sinister grin. His fingers, now elongated and claw-like, twitched as he reached for me. I ran. I didn't think. I just ran. The hallways blurred around me as I sprinted, my shoes squeaking against the polished floor. Every turn I took seemed to lead me back to room 104. The door was always ajar. The flickering light always invited me in. I stopped, gasping for breath, and dared to glance behind me. The hallway was empty, but I could hear footsteps, slow, deliberate, echoing against the walls. I crept toward the classroom, unable to stop myself. It was as if the room was pulling me in. This time, the chalkboard wasn't blank. Words were scrawled across it in jagged, frantic letters. "You're next." Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind me. The fluorescent lights buzzed and flickered out, plunging the room into darkness. I heard the sound of chalk screeching against the board. I wasn't alone. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Hands shaking, I pulled it out. The notification read, "Welcome to detention." A clawed hand gripped my shoulder. The last thing I saw before the lights went out was the blank-faced student standing in the corner, now inches away, holding my homework. The walls seemed to close in, and the silence became deafening. Then I screamed. I always loved exploring old buildings, but nothing had prepared me for the forgotten library hidden beneath the city. My friend Alex had heard rumors about it, an abandoned archive, lost to time, buried beneath the metro station. We decided to find it, armed with flashlights and a vague map scrawled on a napkin. The entrance was a rusted, heavy door tucked away in a maintenance tunnel. It creaked open with an echo that seemed to stretch for miles. A gust of stale air hit us, carrying the scent of mildew and something faintly metallic. Alex hesitated, but I pressed forward, the thrill of discovery urging me on. The stairs spiraled downward endlessly, the walls narrowing as we descended. Finally, we stepped into a vast, cavernous room. Rows of bookshelves stretched endlessly in every direction, their spines coated with dust and cobwebs. The air was thick with a peculiar silence, as though the walls absorbed every sound. "Look at this place," Alex whispered, his voice barely audible. I shone my flashlight across the shelves, marveling at the ornate carvings on the wood. Each book seemed ancient, their titles written in languages I couldn't recognize. Some didn't have titles at all, just strange, unrecognizable symbols etched into the spines. Alex wandered off to inspect a strange pedestal in the center of the room. It held a single book, larger than any I'd ever seen, its cover a deep, blood-red leather. "Hey, check this out," he called, his voice louder now. I hurried over, my flashlight trembling slightly. The book had no title, just a strange, pulsing emblem that seemed to shift under the light. "Don't open it," I said instinctively, a chill creeping up my spine. But Alex was already flipping the cover. The moment he did, the room seemed to breathe. A low, guttural sound echoed around us, like the groan of a waking beast. "What the hell was that?" Alex stammered, slamming the book shut. The shelves began to shudder, books tumbling to the floor. I grabbed Alex's arm, dragging him toward the stairs, but they were gone. The doorway we had entered through was now a solid wall of bookshelves. "We're trapped!" Alex yelled, his voice cracking with panic. "No, there has to be another way out," I said, trying to steady my voice. As we stumbled through the aisles, the lights from our flashlights began to flicker. Shadows darted between the shelves, just out of sight. At first, I thought it was just the shifting light playing tricks on my mind. But then I heard it, whispering. It started as a faint murmur, growing louder with each step we took. The words were incomprehensible, but the tone was unmistakably hostile. Alex's breathing grew ragged, his flashlight swiping frantically across the darkness. "They're watching us," he muttered. "Who?" I asked, my voice shaking. He didn't answer, just pointed. My flashlight followed his gesture, landing on a figure at the end of the aisle. It was tall and thin, its face obscured by the shadows. It didn't move, but its head tilted slightly, as though observing us. "Run," Alex whispered. We bolted in the opposite direction, the figure remaining motionless as we fled. The aisles twisted unnaturally, looping back on themselves. No matter how far we ran, we kept ending up back at the pedestal with the red book. "I think it wants us to open it," Alex said, his voice barely audible. "No, we can't," I said, backing away. But the whispers grew deafening, the shadows closing in around us. In a panic, Alex reached for the book and threw it open. The room exploded with light, blinding and cold. When I opened my eyes, Alex was gone. The book lay open on the pedestal, its pages blank. The whispers had stopped, replaced by an eerie, oppressive silence. I turned and there he was, Alex, or what was left of him. His face was blank, his eyes hollow, his body frozen like a statue. His hand stretched toward me as though in warning. The last thing I remember is the book slamming shut on its own. When I woke up, I was back at the entrance of the tunnel alone. But now, every time I close my eyes, I see the forgotten library, and I hear the whispers calling me back.